Israel runs on oil. Its power plants burn it. Its military aircraft need it. Its tanks, its trucks, its ships, all of it, depends on a supply chain that runs through one of the most strategically important industrial facilities in the Middle East. Israel's oil refineries, known as the Bazan Group, process the vast majority of Israel's refined petroleum products. Aviation fuel. Diesel. Gasoline. The petrochemical feedstock that Israel's industrial economy depends on. It is not just an energy facility. It is the artery. The single point through which Israel's fuel supply flows. A missile hit it. Not a drone. Not a mortar shell. Not an improvised rocket fired from a few kilometers away. A missile. Fired with enough precision, enough range, and enough destructive power to reach one of Israel's most protected industrial installations, and strike a fuel tanker moored inside it. The fire. The smoke. The burning tanker. And the question that every intelligence analyst, every energy market trader, and every military planner in Israel, Washington, and Tehran is asking right now. Was this a warning shot? Or was this the opening move of a campaign to cut Israel's fuel supply from underneath it? In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through everything. What Israel's oil refineries actually are. And why hitting them is a fundamentally different kind of attack than anything we have seen in this conflict. What missile was used, how it reached its target, and what the strike reveals about the capabilities of whoever fired it. What this means for Israel's economy, its military, and its ability to sustain a prolonged conflict. And the most important question of all, what comes next, and whether this single strike just changed the rules of this entire war. To understand why a missile striking a fuel tanker at Israel's oil refineries is fundamentally different from any previous attack in this conflict, you need to understand exactly what was hit, and what that facility means to a country at war. The Bazan Group, formerly known as Oil Refineries Limited, is Israel's largest oil refining company. Its primary refining complex sits on the southern shore of Haifa Bay, occupying a stretch of industrial waterfront that has been processing petroleum products for Israel since the state was founded. Bazan Group key statistics. Refining capacity, approximately 9.8 million tons of crude oil per year. Market share, the dominant supplier of refined fuel products within Israel. Products, aviation fuel, diesel, gasoline, liquefied petroleum gas, petrochemical feedstock. Location. Haifa Bay Industrial Zone, integrated with the port, pipeline network, and national fuel distribution system. What those numbers mean in plain terms is this: the overwhelming majority of the aviation fuel that Israel's Air Force burns, every F-35 sortie, every F-15 strike mission, every helicopter, is refined at or flows through the Bazan facility. The diesel that Israel's Merkava battle tanks run on. The fuel that powers the Navy's patrol vessels. The gasoline in every military transport vehicle. All of it traces back to the refining and distribution infrastructure concentrated in Haifa Bay. And it is not only the military that depends on this facility. Israel's civilian economy runs on the same fuel. Power plants that generate electricity for Israeli cities. The trucking network that moves food and goods. The hospitals that need backup generators. In a country the size of New Jersey, there is no redundancy large enough to simply route around the loss of your primary fuel processing complex. This is what strategists call critical national infrastructure, the kind of target whose disruption does not just damage a military. It destabilizes a society. Now, the facility is not without protection. Israel's military has designated Haifa's industrial zone as a priority defended site, and the Iron Dome batteries and other air defense systems covering the Haifa region represent some of the densest air defense coverage in the country. Which brings us to the most alarming element of this strike. Not that a missile hit a fuel tanker at Israel's oil refinery. But that a missile reached it at all. Israel's air defenses failed to intercept this weapon before it struck one of the most heavily defended pieces of infrastructure in the country. Either the missile was sophisticated enough to defeat the intercept attempt, or it approached from a vector, at a speed, or at an altitude that the defending systems were not fully configured to handle. Both possibilities have serious implications. And we are going to examine both in the next section. As for the fuel tanker itself, a vessel moored at the refinery's docking facility, either loading or offloading petroleum products at the time of the strike, the images tell a story that no press release can fully convey. Fuel tankers carry enormous quantities of flammable material under pressure. A strike that ignites a tanker's cargo does not just damage the vessel. It creates a sustained, intense fire that threatens the surrounding infrastructure. The pipeline connections, the docking equipment, the adjacent storage tanks. Emergency crews from Haifa and across the northern region responded. The bay itself became part of the fire response, with vessels working to prevent the blaze from spreading to the broader facility. The refinery was not destroyed. But it was struck. A fuel tanker was burning in the heart of Israel's most important energy facility. And the message written in that smoke was unmistakable. The weapon that struck the fuel tanker at Israel's oil refineries is the central question in every military and intelligence briefing happening right now. What was it? Who fired it? And how did it get through? Let us work through each of those questions in turn. The attack on a refinery facility near a major port, at the level of precision required to strike a specific vessel at a moored docking facility, is not something that can be accomplished with unguided rockets. This was not a Qassam fired in a general direction. This required either a precision-guided cruise missile with terminal guidance capability, a ballistic missile with a maneuvering warhead, or an advanced loitering munition capable of identifying and striking a specific target. Missile type comparison. Unguided rockets, Qassam, Grad area weapons, no precision, short to medium range. Anti-ship cruise missiles. Sea skimming, designed for naval targets, can be adapted for coastal infrastructure. Precision ballistic missiles, Fateh 110, Zulfiqar-class GPS/INS guided, high-speed, designed for hardened fixed targets. Ballistic missiles with maneuvering re-entry vehicles, highest speed, most difficult to intercept. The range to the target and the origin of the strike are critical factors. Haifa sits on Israel's northern Mediterranean coastline. The actors with both the motivation and the demonstrated capability to strike targets in northern Israel with precision-guided missiles include Hezbollah in Lebanon, operating from positions along Israel's northern border and the Lebanese coast, and, potentially, Iran directly, though the range and complexity of a direct Iranian strike on Haifa would require a more advanced system. Hezbollah has demonstrated in previous rounds of conflict that it possesses precision-guided missiles capable of striking specific facilities in northern Israel. Iran has invested years in providing Hezbollah with upgraded guidance kits for its rocket and missile arsenal, specifically for the purpose of being able to threaten Israeli infrastructure rather than just population centers. An anti-ship cruise missile. Fired from a coastal position in Lebanon or from a vessel in the eastern Mediterranean, would be consistent with both the nature of the target and the weapon system most likely to be available to the actors in this conflict. Anti-ship missiles are designed to strike vessels precisely. A fuel tanker moored at a docking facility is, in the targeting logic of a precision cruise missile, an extremely high-value and relatively straightforward target. Large, metal, stationary, and filled with flammable liquid. Now, the most uncomfortable question. How did it get through? Iron Dome, as effective as it is against rockets and short-range threats, was not designed as the primary defense against precision cruise missiles or advanced ballistic missiles. That role falls to David's sling for medium to long-range ballistic and cruise missiles, and Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 for longer-range ballistic threats. The failure to intercept in this instance points to one of several possibilities. First, saturation. If the missile strike was preceded or accompanied by other threats, drone swarms, additional rockets, decoy launches, the defending systems may have been overwhelmed or their targeting prioritization disrupted. Second, flight profile. A sea-skimming cruise missile that approaches at very low altitude over open water is among the most difficult intercept scenarios for land-based air defense systems. Radar coverage has physical limitations at low altitudes over the sea surface, and the time between detection and impact for a fast sea skimmer can be extremely short. Third, the system attempted an intercept and did not achieve a clean kill. A reality that no air defense system, regardless of its sophistication, can entirely eliminate. Whatever the specific failure mode, the result is the same: a precision weapon struck one of Israel's most critical energy facilities. And across the region, in Tehran, in Beirut, in every command post monitoring this conflict, that result has been noted carefully. If the refinery can be hit once, it can be hit again. A missile strike on a fuel tanker at Israel's primary oil refining facility creates damage that operates on three simultaneous levels: immediate physical damage, medium-term supply chain disruption, and long-term strategic signaling. Let us work through each one. The immediate physical damage is the most visible and the most direct. A burning fuel tanker at a docking facility is not simply a lost vessel. It is a disruption to the entire receiving and processing operation at that facility. The fire response, the assessment of damage to surrounding infrastructure, the inspection of pipeline connections, the evaluation of whether adjacent storage tanks have been compromised, all of this halts normal operations at the refinery for a period that can range from hours to days depending on what exactly was damaged. During that operational pause, Israel's fuel supply is drawing down reserves rather than replenishing them. For a country engaged in active, high-intensity military operations, running combat air patrols, conducting strike missions, moving armored formations, fuel consumption is not a peacetime number. The Israeli military burns aviation fuel, diesel, and jet propellant at rates that reflect the demands of sustained combat operations. The medium-term supply chain disruption depends entirely on what was damaged, how severely, and how quickly repairs can be completed. But here is what makes the Bazan facility so difficult to simply work around: there is no simple workaround. Israel does import refined fuel products directly. Tankers arriving from international suppliers can offload refined petroleum at the Haifa port terminal. But the refinery itself processes the crude oil that feeds Israel's entire petrochemical industry, not just fuel, but the feedstocks for plastics, chemicals, and industrial materials that Israel's manufacturing sector depends on. Disrupting the refinery does not just affect fuel prices at the pump. It sends pressure waves through the entire Israeli industrial economy. Bazan Group Downstream Impact Map. Aviation fuel: Israeli Air Force operational capacity. Diesel: ground forces, generators, logistics. Gasoline: civilian transport, emergency services. Petrochemicals: industrial manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, construction. LPG: residential and commercial heating and cooking. Now consider the strategic signaling dimension, because this is where the Bazan strike changes the nature of this conflict in ways that pure military analysis can miss. Every previous missile and rocket attack on Israel, from Hamas in Gaza, from Hezbollah in Lebanon, from Iranian proxies across the region, has targeted populated areas, military installations, or transportation infrastructure. Those attacks are devastating to the people in their path. But a strike on the Bazan oil refinery is a different kind of statement. It says, we can reach your industrial heart. We can reach the facility that refines the fuel that flies your aircraft and drives your tanks. We are no longer targeting what you build and where you live. We are targeting what makes your military run. This is not a terror attack. It is a strategic attack on Israel's warfighting capacity. Targeted at the supply chain that sustains the conflict rather than at the conflict's immediate combatants. The implications for Israel's military planning are immediate. If the refinery is a demonstrated target, Israel must now consider whether it needs to accelerate the distribution of fuel reserves to disperse storage locations, reducing the vulnerability created by having critical fuel stocks concentrated in a single facility. Whether it needs to re-examine the air defense configuration covering Haifa Bay, specifically to address the attack vector that allowed this missile to reach its target. And whether this strike is the first in a planned series of attacks designed to degrade Israel's fuel supply over time rather than destroy it in a single blow. The question of who fired the missile that struck the fuel tanker at Israel's oil refineries carries implications that extend far beyond attribution. In the current conflict environment, Operation Epic Fury ongoing, Iran and Israel in active confrontation, Hezbollah fully activated along the northern border, and the United States militarily engaged across the region, the list of actors with both the motivation and the capability to execute this strike is not long. Hezbollah, positioned in Lebanon with direct line of sight to Haifa, has demonstrated precision-guided missile capability in previous conflicts. Has been openly threatening Israeli infrastructure throughout Operation Epic Fury. Iranian-supplied precision guidance systems for its missile arsenal represent exactly the capability required for this type of strike. Most likely candidate based on geography, capability, and established threat doctrine. Iran directly has the missile range and the precision capability, but a direct Iranian strike on Israeli civilian and energy infrastructure, as distinct from military installations, would represent a significant additional escalation step with its own deterrence implications. Possible, but a more extreme escalation than Hezbollah acting as proxy. Houthi forces from Yemen have demonstrated the capability to strike Israel at extended range using ballistic missiles and drones. Have targeted Israel previously during this conflict. However, a precision strike on a specific vessel at a docking facility represents a more sophisticated targeting task than typical Houthi long-range attacks. Less likely as primary actor, but cannot be excluded. Regardless of which actor physically fired the missile, the targeting decision, striking Israel's primary oil refinery, almost certainly reflects Iranian strategic guidance. Iran's doctrine for its regional proxy network is built around the concept of a resistance axis. A coordinated set of actors across Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, and Gaza who can apply simultaneous, multidirectional pressure on Israel and the United States. The decision to escalate from attacking military installations and populated areas to attacking critical energy infrastructure is not a decision a proxy commander makes independently. It is a strategic directive. And its timing. In the context of Iran's ongoing conflict with the United States over the Strait of Hormuz and the broader Operation Epic Fury campaign, makes its purpose clear. Iran is attacking energy infrastructure on both ends of the conflict simultaneously. In the Strait of Hormuz, Iran is attempting to choke off the fuel that flows to the rest of the world, blocking the tankers that carry oil out of the Gulf. At Haifa's oil refineries, Iran's network is attempting to strike at the fuel that sustains Israel's ability to fight, hitting the facility that processes the petroleum Israel's military runs on. This is not a coincidence of timing. This is a coordinated energy warfare strategy, designed to apply economic and military pressure through the disruption of fuel supply at multiple points simultaneously. What comes next depends on Israel's response. A missile strike on the Bazan refinery is an attack on Israeli sovereignty and on Israeli critical infrastructure. Israel's long-established doctrine of disproportionate response, striking back harder than it was hit, against targets that demonstrate the cost of attacking Israel, almost certainly means a significant Israeli military response is coming. The question is not whether Israel responds. The question is what Israel chooses to hit. If Hezbollah fired the missile, Israel's response will target Hezbollah infrastructure in Lebanon, potentially at a scale that reflects the severity of the attack on Israeli civilian and industrial infrastructure. If Israeli intelligence determines that the targeting decision came from Tehran, and Iranian fingerprints on the strategic guidance are almost certain, Israel may choose to make Iran feel the response directly, rather than through a proxy. Either path carries escalation risk that extends beyond the immediate military exchange. And in a conflict already balanced on the edge of broader regional war, a strike on Israel's oil refinery may be the moment that tips that balance. Let me lay the complete picture out on one map. A precision missile, likely a guided cruise missile or advanced ballistic weapon, struck a fuel tanker moored at Israel's Bazan oil refinery complex in Haifa Bay. The tanker burned. Emergency crews responded. The refinery was not destroyed, but it was struck, at the heart of Israel's fuel supply chain. The weapon defeated, evaded, or overwhelmed Israel's air defense coverage of one of its most critical industrial facilities. That failure will be analyzed intensely in the hours and days ahead. The Bazan facility processes the majority of Israel's refined petroleum products, including the aviation fuel, diesel, and military-grade fuels that sustain Israel's ongoing military operations. A sustained campaign against this facility would not just raise fuel prices. It would directly constrain Israel's capacity to continue fighting. The missile strike fits a pattern of coordinated Iranian energy warfare strategy, choking fuel supply at the Strait of Hormuz from one direction, striking Israeli fuel infrastructure from another. Israel's response is coming. Its doctrine demands it. And the scale and target of that response will define the next phase of this conflict. The smoke rising over Haifa Bay today is not just the smoke from a burning tanker. It is the signal that this war has entered a new phase. A phase where the targets are not just soldiers and military installations. Where the target is the fuel that keeps a nation fighting. And where the line between a military campaign and an attack on an entire society's ability to function is being deliberately erased. Somewhere in Haifa tonight, a fuel tanker is cooling in the water of the bay. And somewhere in Tehran, in Beirut, in Washington, and in Jerusalem, people are staring at maps, calculating what comes next. The refinery was hit. The question is what burns next? 3 questions before I go. Drop your answer in the comments. A. A missile struck Israel's primary oil refinery, a facility that processes the fuel Israel's military runs on. Is this the beginning of a deliberate campaign to degrade Israel's warfighting capacity by attacking its fuel supply chain? And can Israel sustain its military operations if the refinery is struck repeatedly? B. Israel's air defense failed to intercept the missile before it hit the Bazan facility. Does this reveal a genuine gap in Israel's layered air defense coverage of its northern coastline? And what does that gap mean for the dozens of other critical infrastructure facilities across Israel that could now be considered vulnerable targets? C. The Bazan strike fits a pattern of simultaneous energy warfare, Hormuz blockaded from the east, Israeli fuel infrastructure hit from the north. Is Iran executing a coordinated strategy to win this war through supply chain disruption rather than direct military confrontation? And if so, is the United States and Israel's current military strategy equipped to counter that approach? A, B, or C? Drop it below right now. If this gave you a clearer understanding of what the Haifa strike actually means, share it with one person who needs to see the full picture. Subscribe. Hit the notification bell. And we will see you in the next one.